I'm thinking about how to introduce you. Well, you're Hen Mazzig.
Mazzig, yeah.
Okay. And I'll introduce you the way I've kind of introduced you to people I've told about you. When I say I'm interviewing this person, if they're not on social media a lot, they're like, who's that? And I say, well, he's an activist who's Jewish, Arab, or speaks Arabic, but doesn't necessarily identify as Arab, gay, Israeli. But then I always feel I have to preface it with, but he's a really wholesome person and he's very kind. I find it, interesting that I have to do that because I think your identity, not by your choice, not by what I want, but by the way the world labels things, carries an inherent divisiveness to it. How do you balance the sharpness of your identity with the nature of who you are? And also, like, how do you describe yourself to people?
Yeah, no, I never thought about it. It's interesting that it's another contradiction in my identity that I'm like kind and open and understanding and trying to put myself in other people's shoes, even my enemies' shoes. When I debate them or when I have disagreements, I always try and be empathetic and sympathetic and and it's not what the world thinks when they read my title or when they say that I see that I was serving in the IDF or that I was, I'm an Israeli. It's like there's always I always have to add this caveat that I'm not that bad. Like, I served in the IDF, but I was a humanitarian officer. I'm Israeli, but I support Israelis and Palestinians. How would I describe myself? I'm an advocate, a writer, an author, speaker. I don't like the term influencer. It's not personally, I don't connect to it. I don't think that it's the way that other people use the term influencer just like doesn't sound. Maybe a thought leader, I guess I would take that. That's how I see myself. I see that I have a position of educating people and sharing information that is, I wouldn't say not biased, because I know I have bias, we all have bias, but I'm trying to share information that would, in a way, and in my opinion, in a way that is bringing people closer and trying to help bring peace closer rather than, pushing people away.
Well, of course, you're kind of aware of the edginess to your identity because you wrote a book called The Wrong Kind of Jew. So tell me a little bit about what you consider the wrong kind of Jew.
Yeah. I called it The Wrong Kind of Jew, but in the book itself I'm saying, like, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a wrong kind of Jew, because every Jew exists in a wrong kind of way. But there's still this expectation by society, by our community of, standards of what being Jewish is, or how we need to behave, or what we need to do. And truth is that no Jew really fulfill each one of the 4,000 mitzvahs in the Torah that are telling us how to live our life and how to practice everything. We're not doing it. We all fail in some ways. And I think that's what I love about Judaism, because it's not a religion of perfection or a religion that seeks this sort of perfection. It's actually understanding that we make mistakes, and that, and it's a religion that celebrates, it's a religion and culture that celebrates both the good and the bad. I was thinking about it, how, in Judaism we have a blessing for when something good happened to us, but also when something bad is happening to us. We say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, which means God is doing, we bless God for whatever comes upon us, not because we want it to happen, but through the bad we understand that there is good. Through the bad there is a lesson to be learned for us, and that's how God is granting us our wishes. It's through lessons that would make us prepare to receive them, and also help us understand what we really need. I think being wrong kind of Jew is just, it's saying that most Jews are living a wrong kind of Jewish life, and we are, and that's what being Jewish is about doing things that are not conventional, and leading a life that is, by definition, our existence in this world is rebelling and contradiction to to everything. I mean, thinking that we have millions of Jews alive today, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up if you think about our history. The fact that we have a Jewish state, even with all of the threats and all of the enemies that we have. So I think, yeah, I like that about being Jewish. That our existence is defiance, and it's an act of resistance.
What I like about the phrase "the wrong kind of Jew" is I also think it's something that any viewer or reader can project their own definition onto it. And the thing that I project onto it is that your identity is an inconvenience for so many kind of intersecting movements. I think there's a real, and we could get into this, but a real push now to view Israel as the white colonial state. The white supremacist, Jewish supremacist state. And if anyone did stepped one foot in Israel, they'd see that most of Israel is brown. But it's interesting that Israel's become like the paramount, of this dynamic of white colonizer, because I think it's the one place that actually destroys the paradigm of that. It's a place where, despite all the struggles of Mizrahi Jews, they are really the culture of Israel, right? Like if you listen to the music, you go and try the food, even the accent and the attitude, right? The masculinity style, it so comes from the Mizrahi culture. So what do you kind of think about that paradox?
Yeah, no, you're spot on this. I mean, Israel is shattering so many rules and if you think of Western societies and how they were being built, if you think about America and compare it to Israel, Israel is a country where Middle Eastern and African people were brought to be saved, to be protected, not in chains. We found it was our refuge. Israel is majority people of color by the American definition of what person of color is. And we live as equal citizens. And then the whole conversation turns into, well, we know, when we speak about this, the racial difference, we speak about Jews versus Muslims, or Jews versus Arabs, right? And that doesn't hold much to it, because the Middle East has majority Arabs, and the Middle East is an Arab empire. So, in fact, Jewish existence in this land is another win for decolonizing and land back movements around the world, because Jews have reclaimed their ancestral homeland. So the only way people were able to convince others that this argument makes sense is because they are tapping into people's prejudice about Jews. And the prejudice is that Jews are white, that Jews are powerful, that they own the banks, they own the media, and if you already has this belief system, then when you're being when a new information being introduced to you that Israel is a white country, that they control the money, that Palestinians are being oppressed, so then all of it adds up in your mind. That's how so many people on the left have been fed this propaganda, and they're actually believing it.
And I do think your identity, along with so many in the mosaic of Israel, is the wrong kind of Jew for the activists, because it shatters their narrative. It's inconvenient to it, and that it's almost a litmus test for me when someone says the Jews are the new Nazis, or they studied the Nazis' playbook. Because the interesting thing is that complicates it even more is if you come to Israel, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you've actually lived there, but the people who on average probably behave more aggressively, or in the ways that kind of get clipped and put on the internet and have more right-wing politics, are the Mizrahi Jews, right? The Ashkenazi Jews tend to veer more left-wing,
yeah,
right? So would that point to more, they're kind of carrying over a sense of retribution or vengeance for how they felt they were treated in dimitude in the Arab lands? Do you think there's a little bit of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and the point that so many people think that Jews in Israel have been victimized by the Nazis, by the European Nazis, and it's not true, because majority of us in Israel, our trauma was not by the Nazis or by the Holocaust in Europe. It was by Arabs in the Middle East that collaborated with Nazis, that invited the Nazis into Iraq, where my grandmother was from. And she, during the Farhud in 1941, she saw her best friend being raped and mutilated in the streets of Iraq, a teenage girl. And she saw a mother and 9 children being killed in the streets of Baghdad just because they were Jewish. And that wasn't done by Nazis. It was actions that are very similar to the Holocaust, but this is the sort of violence that is not being discussed in Western conversation, in academia. And if it is being discussed, I read that in California a few years ago, they had a debate about how to include Mizrahim into DEI teaching, and they said we should include Mizrahim as suffering from Islamophobia, which was so bizarre to me. I mean, to reduce, they didn't want it to add us as experiencing anti-Semitism or define our experience of hatred as anti-Semitism, which is so insane because it is anti-Semitism. And the definition of anti-Semitism that we experience is just broader than just what they're trying to keep it. They want to say anti-Semitism is only what Jews in Europe have experienced, but that's, it's discounting our experience, it's discounting our existence. And that's something that is really important for the progressive movement and voices on the left to do, because if we exist, if Mizrahi Jews and our story exist, then it shatters everything. It shatters the identity, the way that they're trying to identify Israel, the way that they're trying to describe Jews and describe this war, the social arguments about the makeup of Israel, the notion that Israel is a quote-unquote apartheid state. How can it be apartheid when I share the same race as Palestinians and as Arabs? We come from the same land. Majority of Israelis, over 55% of Israeli Jews are first, second, and third generation Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. So majority of us are actually Middle Eastern. So it can't be an apartheid when if the majority has the same rights as a minority. So none of it makes sense. And I write about it in my book that while I do support a Palestinian state and I support two-state solution and I support the national rights, my dad doesn't. My dad is a big Likud supporter. He's a Tunisian man, way browner than me. He looks like he is an African man. And yet all of his life he supported the right-wing coalition. My mom is Iraqi, she's also on the right. Majority of Israeli Jews from the Middle East and North Africa in Israel today are voting right-wing. And the Ashkenazi Israeli Jews are the ones that are voting left, that care about Palestinian rights. And I think the difference comes from, as my grandma told me, she said, you will never know what it's like to be neighbor with some of those people. And I don't hate her. Sorry, of course I don't hate her, but I don't hold her accountable for the statements. But I think it's coming from a place of trauma. She's been victimized by Arabs, and of course she would hold these opinions. And it's not racist because it's her race is similar to theirs. So I don't think that it comes from racism. It comes from trauma, and it's a trauma that is being continuously erased.
You're someone who identifies as being on the left, right? Like, would you call yourself a leftist?
Yeah, a raging lefty.
A raging lefty. It's interesting because you could be as far to the left as, maybe not as possible, but very far to the left in Israel. And in a way, by definition, you don't even land on the left in America because you're not anti-Zionist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I consider myself a liberal, center left. But I think that what the left has become has really become the foundation of their identity. It actually makes sense that they're anti-Israel, right? The paradigm with which they break down the world, that this post-colonial lens through which they see everything. Do you not see that as part and parcel? Like, do you really view the Israel thing as kind of a detached one-off where they took an off-ramp and you didn't join them?
No, I think if you look at the definition of the social movement on the left and progressivism and what they care about, and I do think that if you talk about post-colonialism, Israel is the embodiment of all of it. It's a liberal democracy. It's one that have very healthy and active criticism of its government, not being done just by a few. It's like talking about 20-30% of the population continuously advocating against the government, protesting against the government, and it's it's working as a functioning democracy. In terms of the inclusion of minorities, I think Israel is really excellent in it. The fact that Arabs in Israel have their own school where they can teach in Arabic, when they can teach the Quran, and by the way, they don't want to teach the Torah. They don't want to teach Hebrew, and that's the fake notion of multiculturalism is about how we need to integrate everyone. And Israel is saying, no, we don't have to. You can have your identity, you can have your cultural identity, and that's true multiculturalism, where there is this distinction. So, in many ways, I think Israel is representing everything that they claim to fight against. So that's why, for me, I feel like it's odd that the left is not embracing Israel. But I mean, not odd. It's odd if you look at what they say they care about.
So you're saying you actually care about the same things as them, they're just operating on false information.
Yeah.
Do you think that if you believed everything, and when I say they, I mean what we see in our social media algorithm every day, do you think if you believed everything they believed, you would be anti-Israel too?
If I received that information, you mean, like the misinformation?
Yeah.
I would love to think that I wouldn't, but I'm afraid that if I didn't have my lived experience, if I didn't come from Israel, if my family wasn't there, if I didn't speak on a daily basis with people in the IDF and in the government, and with Palestinians, I would probably believe this misinformation. How can you not? I mean, you look at the algorithm of an anti-Israel activists, and we're able to do it today with the technology that we have to see what sort of information they are exposed to. It's a video after video of dead children, and it's horrific and it's heartbreaking. And if that's what you are fed every day, how can you not be enraged and get to a point of even hatred of a country, and that they're telling you the way to fight it is by standing up against them?
What I'm talking about is believing almost the conspiracy theory level narrative that Israel was founded as this colonial entity with basically the sole goal of ethnically cleansing or genociding the Palestinians and everything that Israel, and they don't care about their own citizens, and they want to, give birth control to the Ethiopians and put the Yemenite in camps or whatever it is, right? Can you see where people come, like if you genuinely believe that as true, like, do you understand why they're anti-Israel? Like, if you had that information and believed it to be true?
Yeah, I mean, you pointed out a few things that have fraction of truth in them, right? Because Ethiopian Jews did receive birth control, but it wasn't done to harm them. It was done because the birth control was helping them for a month to 3 months, and then they were able to bring children. That's how we have new generation of Ethiopian Jews. It is true that Mizrahi Jews, Yemenite Jews were treated wrongly, but this has been corrected. But they weren't treated this way systematically because of their identity. So I think that's why a lot of people are saying this less than half a truth, and then they're believing in it. Yeah, I do see how you are presented with this information, you believe it, because when I go to England, they are taught that the anti-Israel thinking is that Israel is a colonial imperial state. That's why they can connect to it personally. When you come to America, they're talking about Israel as a racist state, as a police state, that the army is so strong and it's militant, and that's why the anti-Israel movement, that's how they believe it. In Canada, they're talking about Israel killing the indigenous population. That's why they can connect with it. In South Africa, it's about Israel being apartheid. It's really fitting. The campaign is just brilliant. It's feeding people exactly what they're ready to observe and understand in a language that they can connect to. And they're doing it. And yeah, I think if I grew up in any of those countries and that's the information I was presented with, I would likely think the same.
Right. And because, this past war being considered by so many a genocide, it's not a one-off thing where they're like, oh, we presented the evidence and that looks like... No, they've gotten people to buy into the argument that Israel's whole existence is based in genocide.
Well, I mean, it's not just this war. They've been claiming that it's a genocide for decades now. It's just this war, they were able to show body counts, and then people would say, oh, okay, well, look how many people were killed. It's a genocide, although it doesn't work like this. But the average person is not as intellectual enough, and I don't blame them. They shouldn't be. They don't need to know international law. No one needs to be not no one, but people are not expected to be experts in international law. But when you're presented with so much misinformation and it's being hammered to you, you believe it at the end.
Right. I think the other thing is that the way people treat Israel, it's similar to how Jews have always been treated, as if accumulatively, like we all have this unified vision of what we want to do. And really what I think Israel is, just like the Jewish people, is a mosaic of many different ideas and opinions, right? There are people in the Israeli government who are probably genocidal or want ethnic cleansing, right? How do you square the wide variety of things going on? Like, you know, the multiculturalism of these societies, mosques, where you could hear the call to prayer and all that stuff, but at the same time, you know, the videos that come out of the West Bank of Palestinians' farms being burned down, accompanied by Israeli soldiers, that's backed by, you know, the most far right-wing people in the government. Like, are you just seeing a fractured society? Is it a result of that? Or like, what is the soul of Israel really? Like, what represents Israel and its intentions?
Yeah, while you're speaking, I'm thinking about America, and I'm thinking about ICE agents going and raiding into you know, communities and arresting people, and how many in this country are condemning it. Does it changes the soul of America? I don't think so. I think there's things that we can protest and policies that we can oppose, but the core of the country remains the same, even though there are some politicians that we can disagree with and some of the statements. And I think it's the same for Israel. I think Israel is a country with human beings. Israelis are human beings, Jews are human beings, and we are susceptible to things that are happening to us, to tragedies and trauma that is happening to us. And after October 7th, I've seen my friends, my family, my cousins going through a shift. I mean, I'm thinking about one of my cousins that before October 7th, her boyfriend met me, and he said to me, he was like, "You're a propagandist for Israel. You're a propagandist to Bibi." And I was so offended, and I had this whole fight with him over Shabbat dinner. And he said, "Yeah, we need to speak about the Palestinians," all of this stuff. After October 7th, I had another Shabbat dinner with him, and he said, you are disgusting with your advocacy for the Palestinians because they don't deserve anything anymore." And it's, you know, it's a person that I really respect. They're married now, they're going to have a baby, and it's just, he changed so much from before October 7th to after. And today he's telling me, it's like, you know, you should follow people like Noah Tishby and Youssef Haddad. They are the ones that are saying the truth, because they're so, you know, they're pro-Israel, and they're not giving an inch to the Palestinians like you do. So yeah, it was just really fascinating to see this shift. I think many Israelis have gone through this, not this shift to this radical like point, but to thinking that the paradigm of two-state solution and having peace with the Palestinians is probably not viable, and that was the hope of Hamas, really. And I'm not sure who won. I don't think there's a clear winner. Hamas did receive a recognition of Palestine from many Western countries. They have turned many in the world to hate us. I mean, I'm thinking about Spain, Portugal, the UK, America. It's everywhere. So I mean, I don't know what was, if that was. I'm suspecting that this was their goal, and I think that they have achieved what they wanted to achieve. And my fear is that Israel would change to losing our moral stand, but I don't think it has changed. I think Israel still has the moral. I mean, just by the fact that the ceasefire was received with joy on the Israeli side, that tells me that we still have our moral values.
Well, I think Israel is treated, and again, Israel's always a mirror of how Jews are treated throughout history. It's treated on this scale of good or evil, right? You could sit down with someone in good faith and be like, "Hey, I saw that thing you posted. I just here's the facts, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Wow, thank you so much." And then the next week you see them, you know, posting all eyes on Rafah or whatever it is. And what you said is so stupidly simple, but such a good point of like, you would never look at ICE and be like, "Yeah, I hate Americans are evil."
Yeah. We need to boycott ourselves.
Yeah.
And yet I'm seeing Israelis even, I've seen this DJ that has been boycotted. He lives Israeli DJ living in Berlin, a queer DJ. He's been boycotted. His shows have been canceled, and he posted a whole thing that said, "I support the cultural boycott of Israel. We should continue boycotting like himself." It was like, how far are we going to go to justify this? It's just ridiculous. You'll never see it from Americans saying, "Oh well, we have ICE, we have this. Maybe we should cease to exist. Maybe we should just give up our country." And you know, this country was born in sin as well. There was, you know, slavery and indigenous population have been almost eradicated completely. The places that they still have, they're being compensated with having a casino but even their fishing rights are being limited in some places. It's not perfect, and yet no one is thinking to say, let's burn down America, right? I mean, some do actually,
but people.
Yeah, sure.
but it's, you know, the thing is, you know, you're saying it for argument's sake, it's not even an equivalency. Like, I think Israel was founded in a much more morally ambiguous and justifiable way than America. I mean, Israel only exists because it fought for its survival, and the things that happened while it was fighting for its survival, yes, there, you know, unethical things there, but I think the inception of it is much more just than somewhere like Canada, US, Australia, UK.
Totally. What is the connection of Americans to this land? I mean, the colonizers that came here. We actually have connection, and it pisses them off. By the way, I'm seeing this whole like argument of like it was promised to us 3,000 years ago. No one is making this argument other than some radical religious settlers in the West Bank, which I disagree with, and majority of Israelis would probably disagree with. This is not the reason that Israel exists where it does, because of this promise from 3,000 years ago. It's because we have archaeological and cultural and connection that far surpasses the 3,000 years, and for the last 3,000 years we have maintained presence in this land. Even though we weren't a majority, we kept coming back to this land. So yeah, we have more right to live in this land than most Western countries have right to, other than the UK within their borders, of course. Yeah.
Well, I think it's hard to have moral absolutes, but we need to have moral consistency and a lack of double standards. And I think the world needs to decide, either we value indigenous rights or we don't.
Right.
Right? Because once the Jews prove that they're indigenous, they're like, oh yeah, but that doesn't matter.
Right.
Right. But for every other group, it does.
Yeah.
I am very curious what you think about groups like Standing Together and individuals like Yuval Abraham, who did No Other Land, because these are people who are basically as critical of the government and of Israel as you can possibly get, and yet they're still technically targets for BDS because of the term normalization. Right? What do you think about them, and how do you, like that DJ you're talking about, like how do they balance that that cognitive dissonance?
I'm not sure how to do it. And the sad, well, not sad, but I mean, the thing is that when I'm thinking about Standing Together and seeing some of their work, I think they're doing amazing work. I support a lot of what they're doing, like when they wanted to allow trucks to go with aid into Gaza. That was a humanitarian act. I know that Hamas is going to use the aid, and I've spoke about it a lot, but the act itself to help Palestinian civilians, I think it's super important. They also arranged time that the Palestinians were holding pictures of dead Israeli children, and Israelis holding pictures of dead Palestinian children and showing this. I thought it was an amazing way to build bridges and see each other's grief. So I do appreciate some of their work, but then when it crosses the line into just seeing or just amplifying the wrongs on the Israeli side and completely ignoring the wrongs on the Palestinian side, it doesn't do justice to anyone. To call for a boycott, a cultural boycott, no less, is the worst way to promote peace. I mean, the people that are probably the most critical of the Israeli government are on the cultural part of Israel. They are the filmmakers. They are the ones that are creating music, that are on the left and hate and despise this government, and yet they are being subjected to this attack. So I don't know how they rationalize it to themselves that they have to do it. But I guess, I see it as anti-Semitism is a form of abuse, and I think they're just victims of an abuse, and they've been abused so much that they believe that they deserve it.
Circling back to like the purpose of this series that I'm doing. It's called So That We Don't Forget, and it's really to like record the cultural moment so that we don't forget how we were treated, how the world treated us, how we felt, what we witnessed. It makes me think about the thing you were talking about in your talk about how you had friends in school who they abandoned you over Israel at one point, and then the kind of hype around it faded, and they came back and they said, "Oh, you're cool. We want to be friends again." Obviously, the world has gotten into a deeper chasm now. How do you think people are going to look back on this time? How do you think historians are going to talk about it in regards to anti-Semitism? Do you think the Columbia protester class, so to speak, is going to be viewed as heroic and justified, or just another, kind of anti-Semitic cohort in history?
I'm not sure. I think that if you look at the history of pre-Holocaust World War II and how this has been documented, the people that have ignored the violence against Jews in Europe and or justified it are looked down upon by historians, even if they were people that have respectable standing in society or being educators or so on. So, but I think the difference is that during the Holocaust there wasn't a Jewish state and Israel didn't exist. So we were the ultimate victims back then, and it was looking back at it, especially in the years after the Holocaust, when historians were documenting it and writing about it. I think probably up to the 60s, there was a romanticization of this story by historians in the West, because they said, we gave the Jews a state, we helped them in their mind. So it was easier to look at it back, but this way. But I think looking back at this time, I'm not sure how they would describe it, and my concern comes from the people that are writing history books today. The professors in academia, and many of them support this movement, and they support this the violence, or they see that the violence is justified, and it's just in their mind compared to the quote unquote genocide that has been ongoing for decades, but these people refuse, the people on the other side, or the leadership on the other side, refused to end the genocide. I mean, the Palestinian leadership, the Hamas, refused to end the so-called genocide. That was really first time in history that something like this happened, which doesn't add up. But historians today are writing those books, which I think will distort what exactly happened. And it will be up to us. It's always up to us. I mean, even Holocaust education, it was up to Jews to tell the story the way that it should have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing that does complicate it is that Israel has an army and is killing people, right? Like armies do. I heard, Benny Morris be asked, like, do you think Israel is the most moral army in the world, or who do you think is? And he said Costa Rica, because they don't have an army, right? When you're a country with an army who's constantly attacked and you're backed into a corner, you're gonna end up, it's going to get messy, and you're going to end up doing things that are unethical on some level. And yeah, I think that has really complicated the narrative of anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semitism gets buried in just yelling about death that happens in pretty much every war. But I'm curious, like, how important do you think it is to posture to appease the global left? What do you think is the balance between Israel kind of acting in its own domestic interest versus also having periphery for how the world views it? Because I think one of the biggest critiques against Israelis is they're so detached from how the world views them.
Yeah. I think Israelis are aware these days of how the world views them. If it's the Eurovision, or even like big soccer games and concerts and musicians and artists that are boycotting Israel and not allowing their music to be played in Israel. Israelis are aware that the world really, by and large, dislike us. And I think that it's been weaponized by the right-wing government in Israel to say, the world doesn't like you anyway, you need a strong country because no one's going to come to save us. And that has been the way that they have ensured that the public in Israel continues to vote for them, because of this fear-mongering. but it's not baseless these days. I think that it's not just Israelis' fault. I think it's also the Jewish community in the West, in America. By and large, the Jewish institutions in America are completely detached from the reality, as I see it, of the danger of anti-Semitism. They use influencers that are so much on the right, and they're trying to posture to right-wing. Even the ADL that used to be more brave and trying to get support from the left in America have shifted their position and their stance, and they're more center-right today, I would say, and that's because of the attacks that they've experienced. But we cannot abandon half of the American public that is liberal and democratic, that used to be on our side, but after the last 2 years, we've lost so much of the support that we used to have. I think it's important that we continue to reach the left, and it's not just because the left is 50% of America, around 50% of America, but it's also because our values are similar to them and to the left, in my view. And I just don't trust the right. And it's not just that I don't trust them because I have this paranoid fear from the right, but I'm seeing people like Tucker Carlson, that used to be a super Zionist. I'm thinking about Candace Owens, that identifies as Zionist, that she loves Israel. I'm thinking about Megyn Kelly, that hosted Marjorie Taylor Greene. Both of them Marjorie Taylor Greene was really pro-Israel, and then started with a space laser, and then Megyn Kelly was also pro-Israel. So I'm seeing what the right is doing, and I'm not confident that they have our best interests as Jews or for Israel. So that's why I would argue that Israel must be a bipartisan issue.
There's so much Mizrahi representation in media in Israel, but people don't look into media in Israel. In fact, they're boycotting it. How important do you think that representation is in America? Like, for example, like someone you've spoken with, and it seems you're friends with, is Emmanuel Shriki, which I have to bring up because I'm a massive Entourage fan. I've seen every season multiple times. What's interesting about her is that she's a Moroccan Jew, and yet her big roles have been she played a Palestinian in Zohan, right, so an Arab, and then in Entourage she played someone named Sloane McEwick, which is a very Gentile name, right? So it just shows how, like, if there are any Mizrahi Jews, A-list actors, they kind of get absorbed into non-Jewish roles, right? Like, what do you think about that and the need to be represented by more than just like Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I had a conversation about this with Emmanuel as well, and with others. But that was the only parts that were offered. No one would take Emmanuel to play a Jewish American young woman. Because she's not fitting the stereotype that has been presented by Hollywood, that we allegedly control, and yet we're not able to even give good representation of Jews in it. So it's a joke. We clearly don't control Hollywood, but yeah, it's kind of disappointing, and it's sad. And I would hope that the Jewish voices within Hollywood would make a difference, but I don't think they want to. And to be honest, when you think about it, there was benefit from presenting Jews as neurotic, as this weak man that is not a threat to you, that will make jokes about themselves, that are seemingly white, that you can relate to them, because this would make us less of a threat to Americans. So I get when it was beneficial for us, we wanted to identify this way. And I think it's no longer beneficial for us, so we need to identify as we really are and show the diversity of Jews. And that's what I'm trying to do today, but I don't think Hollywood is doing enough of it.
Yeah, people are threatened by Jewish strength. And maybe this is a whole other conversation that we probably don't have time for, but briefly, like, being a gay person, how do you feel about the tension between the machismo masculinity of the Israeli, especially the Mizrahi Jew, but also, gay people have also, been put in their own boxes? Like, how do you kind of grapple with that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see this phenomena in Israel where there's Mizrahi gay men, and they have this nightclub called Arisa. Arisa is the name of a very spicy Moroccan spread. So it's supposed to be the spicy event, and they have this Mizrahi drag queens, and it's, you go into it, and it's really buff, Middle Eastern men that are very comfortable with or want to be very macho and very manly, but they're also gay, and they're also they have this conflict of identities because their family taught them that a man should be, that's what my family taught me, a man should be strong and vocal and very aggressive, I would say, and then they're also gay, so they have this conflict because also our gay identity since I was a kid would have being gay would be something that Mizrahi Jews would dismiss and say it's something that we don't want. It's a disease. It's horrible things. So a lot of them are dealing with that, and there's a lot of shame and self-inflicted shame of who they are and what they represent. They're living with this two notions in one time. So yeah, it's a whole conversation, but it's a fascinating cultural phenomena.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, if you were speaking to someone who's like, hey, I hear, what are all these protests about? Like, what's all this Israel-Palestine about? They don't know anything about it. Like, how would you very briefly, which is obviously an absurd thing to ask, but how would you very briefly kind of, I've heard it put this way, how would you explain it to a 10-year-old? But like, how would you explain the crux of the issue and like describe the plight of each side?
Yeah, I would say that Jews have lived in this land for 3,000 years. We have this connection to this land. This is where we started from. This is where we developed our identity and developed our language, developed our rituals, and we were forced out by empires from this land. We returned to our homeland and we've rebuilt it. Meanwhile, another group of people that have also been abused by imperial forces and share this imperial identity in the region have faced a plight of their own. And they did not receive the support of the world that the Jews have received after a genocide happened to us. And they also have a plight that they're not suffering a genocide, but they're suffering a lot of violence, and violence, some of it they inflict on terror groups that are controlling them, inflicting on this population, and both sides are being victimized by imperial ruling in the region, and one side, Israel, has been investing in army and protecting its civilians and systems to protect them, and another group has invested in forces, in weapon and arms to attack the other side, and also in PR and propaganda. And this propaganda has reached many people in the world that they believe it, and they believe that only one side is guilty, that it's only black and white. And the truth is that there's a lot in between. And the way to solve it would be for those people to see each other, and not in the way that the world is telling us to see each other, but as we really are, and understand each other's pain and trauma.
I think one of the deep rooted issues I see with the Palestinian identity is this is mostly a local Levantine population whose aspirations were hijacked by pan-Arab nationalism, right? And I think part of the reason they've never accepted a state, because the inception of their identity, which started being used in the 20th century, was not based on a state. It was this anti-West, anti-colonial, anti-Zionist identity. So given that is kind of like the inception of their identity, I'm not saying they don't have other things like, olive trees and certain foods and customs and things like that, but the Palestinian identity, given that's the inception, how do they move forward in a productive way? Like, what is the story that they can tell themselves that can actually lead to like a healthy state living next to Israel?
I spoke to one of the hostages that returned from captivity, an 18-year-old kid, and he said that when Hamas kidnapped him, they kept yelling at him and say, "Where are your families from?" And he said, "My family is from Israel." And he said, "No, your grandparents from Israel." It's like 6th or 7th generation in Israel. And he said it to them, and they kept yelling at him that he's lying, that it can't be, that they came from Poland. They must have come from Poland. And then another interrogator said the same thing. And I was thinking to myself how they really believe that. They really believe that the propaganda that they're sharing with the world. I think what it would take is to recognize each other's truth, to recognize each other's connection to the land, and I don't think it matters who has a stronger connection. The fact is that Palestinian identity was created. It's much more recently. Undisputedly, it's in recent time, but it's an identity that exists now. They have a national identity, and for me to advocate for our national rights, but while dismissing their national rights, it's just not fair. So I think we should be able to see that, and they should be able to see ours. But it's not going to happen as long as the world keeps pitting us against each other, and that's what they're doing. And I just, my biggest hope is not only that this would phase and that people would, it's a trend, and I'm hoping that this trend would pass. But it's not just because I want Jews to be protected. Of course I want that, but I'm hoping that once people move on, we'll be able to do the healing, because there is a way to do it. And before October 7th it happened, you're thinking about the people in the kibbutzim and how they were helping Palestinians and the connection that they had with Palestinians, and tragedy of them being killed by Palestinians. But I remind myself that those were a few thousand people that, it's insane number, but it's a few thousand people radicalized, led by a terrorist organization and by countries in the Middle East that had really strong agenda, that have been brainwashed to believe that. And my hope is that there are many thousands of others in Gaza that would want a better future, or would be able to see a better future. I know it sounds, as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, wow, you're such an idealist, and it's too optimistic, but it's the only way that we can survive is by being optimistic.
Right, and it has to come up through the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you just leave it to whoever's in power, it's just going to repeat itself. So thank you so much, Hen. You represent a nuance that I think is the future to fixing all the issues, so I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Saud.